squeeze in the back. Okay, well, hello and welcome. We're going to start now, and other people can trickle in. So I just want to say a couple of words first before we start today, since the beginning of the quarter. I'm Joan Berry. I'm Associate Director of the Center for Ethics and Society, which is the sponsor of this series. So it's two things. It's actually a weekly brown bag lunch series, so if you want to bring your lunch, please do. I'm going to eat my lunch every time we come to make you feel welcome to do the same, and we certainly encourage you to do so. It's over lunchtime. We like to think you're not skipping lunch. But it's also a class. So for those that are here for the one-unit class, this is Eric, and he'll introduce the speaker every week, and he's kind of the go-to person for you as a student coordinator if you have any issues about the class or problems with your attendance and things like that. And on the syllabus, it'll describe what the requirements are, how many classes you have to attend, and how many blogs you have to post. If you're here just for the one-off lecture, you're still invited to post to the blog. No reason you can't. Or you want to look at it, that's fine. Since this one today is sort of military-ish in nature, I'm just going to leave a few of these, which is part of our Ethics in War series, which is on its second year, and we've got this quarter and next quarter, so I'll put those by the door. And Eric, if you could just remind me the blog name.
Yeah, it's ethicsandnoon.stanford.edu. And it's on the syllabus too. And I'll also
for those that are not getting a syllabus.
Does everyone have a syllabus?
Oh, I just meant if they're not in the class and they don't have a syllabus.
Yeah.
So feel free to go there and look and read and add your own comments. And if you came just today thinking you were only coming to one, but you found it interesting, we'd be delighted if you came as often as worked into your schedule. You'll see a lot of different talks that we do, a lot of different areas that we cover, which makes it actually quite fun. And today, Eric will introduce our speaker.
Yeah, great. So I'll just take like 3 minutes to talk about logistics and then introduce our guest today, Mr. Miller. So welcome to Ethics at Noon. Each week we bring in some faculty from around the university to speak on the ethical issues in their research. So last quarter we had computer scientists and anthropologists and everyone just from all over. And we often break it down into about half lecture and then half a conversation, round table discussion. And yeah, I think this course is going to be exciting. We have people from all over, Dean McLennan, we have...
Look at the syllabus.
Yeah, I guess you can look at the syllabus. Yeah, we have another guy I'm really excited about is we have basically Stanford's like chief lobbyist coming at the very end. So anyway, it's kind of all over the map. And what we'll all kind of work to do is really try and bring out the normative questions in their work. So in terms of logistics, you can see on the syllabus, you can either enroll for credit or not. You're welcome to come and just sit and listen whatever you like. It's satisfactory or no credit grading. To get satisfactory, you have to come to 8 of the 9 talks and post a blog response to 7 of the 9. And yeah, that brings up the blog. So ethicsatnoon.stanford.edu. About an hour or two after each lecture, I'll kind of post up a little prompt, and we kind of kick off the discussion from there. And you can feel free to post back and forth just to try and sift through some of the ideas. Let's see. I think that's about it. Are there any other logistics that I'm missing? Do you guys have any questions? Yeah.
Is there like an attendance sheet?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. So about halfway through each class, I'll pass around an attendance sheet that you can sign. I have one today. You can just fill in if your name's not on it. And I'll also send out a coursework message with the syllabus today and links to the blog and all of that. Okay, great. So today we have a fellow from CSAC, Charlie Miller, who was a colonel in the U.S. Army. And he's speaking to us today about preserving decision space under pressure, a reflection from the surge into Iraq. And I'll just spend a minute or two just kind of talking through your bio so we know what you're all about. So from Staunton, Virginia, a grad of West Point, and also got a PhD in political science from Columbia University, and taught IR in the Department of Social Sciences at West Point. At CSAC now, he's researching the means of formal and informal communication between Washington and theater commanders during wartime. Yeah, and today he'll come and talk to us about Charlie Miller worked for General Petraeus during the surge in 2007, 2008. And we'll talk about how he set the parameters for thinking about yeah, how he was able to preserve his decision space at the time when kind of Congress was pushing the surge and really kind of like really trying to demand that it be successful. So great, thanks for coming. I'm glad to have you.
Thank you. I appreciate all of you coming out today, and what I'm going to talk about is just, it's my opinion, so I have to give this little disclaimer up front. It's not the opinion of the United States Army or the Department of Defense. It's just my reflections from what I saw as kind of a worker bee level in Iraq in 2007, 2008. So I'm going to be self-indulgent a little bit up front and give you some background on me so you understand where I'm coming from. This is where I come from, Stanton, Virginia. It's really the opposite of the Bay Area in terms of diversity. So everybody there pretty much looked like me. We were a bunch of poor farmer, Protestant, Scots-Irish, English types or whatever. So very narrow worldview, good people. I go back there once in a while. My brother still lives there. And a little secret, if you're ever traveling through, it's pronounced Stanton, silent U. That way if we know if people are from out of town so we can charge them higher prices. It's really, it's out in the Shenandoah Valley, pretty part of the country, so if you're ever there, make a stop. That's my pitch for Stanton. All right, West Point, this is where I spent my formative years, 1986 to 1990. I was cadet there. There was a Cold War going on, seemed like a good thing to do at the time. Hey, I'm gonna go study. The price was right, it was free. So when you guys get further on in your careers and you have children, that's always an attractive option for them. If you ever wondered why they call it West Point, you can kind of see from this photo. It is a point of land from the west sticking into the Hudson River. And it started as a very strategically important place during the Revolutionary War. The Hudson River was a main thoroughfare for the British Navy to reinforce their troops. And this was a narrow choke point where we put a fort at West Point to shoot down onto the river and keep the British from going up and down. They had a great chain at one point. They were going to stretch across the river. They did stretch the chain across, great big links on it, about this big. It was never tested by a British ship. But the theory was it would slow them down enough where they could shoot at them. A strategic place, it was also a historical place. Benedict Arnold, what he was accused of being a traitor for was giving away the defense plan of West Point, where the forts were located, where the cannons were. And then his accomplice was caught right across the river, and then he got away. All right, infantry. This is what I did once I got out of West Point for about 7 or 8 years. Infantry or the ground troops in the Army. I was an infantry officer, second lieutenant, a first lieutenant, a captain. So I was platoon leader, company commander. This is a picture from the Ranger School where I later worked. So that's down in Florida somewhere. They try to make you as miserable as you can to see if you can continue doing your mission, doing what you're supposed to as a leader. And they take away food, they take away sleep, things like that. So you start hallucinating, imagining things that aren't there. It's a good school. If you ever get a chance, go to it. All right, I went to somewhere that was about as opposite from the infantry and Ranger School as you can imagine. Columbia University. Had a great opportunity that the Army had. I was able to go to Columbia and study in residence for 2 years and then go back and teach at West Point for 3 years. So went to Columbia, very much the hub of as much diversity as you can imagine in the United States, right in Manhattan. I spent 2 years there and then wrote my dissertation while I was up teaching at West Point. But just really a broadening opportunity, a place to go where people had many different opinions, many different theories of how the world worked, and just learn and absorb and do everything that was great in New York City. So keep that in mind when you guys go to grad school. All right, Iraq. So I had one graduate education in Columbia. I consider my 27 months in Iraq a second graduate education. I did 2 tours there. The first tour was in 2004, 2005. I was the executive officer or / executive assistant to then Lieutenant General Petraeus. So we were standing up the training command. Our mission was to train Iraqi forces, get them ready to hand over security responsibility to them. And that was our notion at the time. Hey, the sooner we can get these guys stood up and competent and able to provide security in their own country, the quicker we can lead. So I looked at drawdown charts of how we were going to do this plan from essentially 2004 forward. Hey, we're going to get down to this number of brigades, this number of troops, we're going down to 0. So I started looking at it in about 2004. As you guys know, we finally did it here in December of 2011. And it takes a while. I mean, when I was cadet, I used to wonder how the Vietnam War lasted so long. I don't wonder that anymore. because once a war gets going, they're very hard to shut down. It takes very deliberate decision-making to do that. This is the obligatory shot that you get when you're in the green zone in Baghdad. Saddam, the hands are allegedly modeled on Saddam's hands. The Iraqi government had some plan to tear these down, but they have not to date. So I think they're still there. Or they were in April was the last time I was in Iraq. So just our little tour shot. All right, so after my second Iraq tour, I went back into surge, which is what I'll talk about most today. I ended up working in the National Security Council staff on Iraq to support the president. And this is the old executive office building in Washington. So this is the White House over here. The West Wing's kind of the low building there. So you would do your briefings, you'd go over to the sitting room, have your big meetings, and we did a lot of work there. Essentially the last 2 years kind of plotting the drawdown and the scope of anything we would offer to Iraq if we did not complete the drawdown. Again, very different to go from Stanton, Virginia, to the infantry, to West Point, to Iraq, and then up at the highest levels of government. It's a very great privilege, neat place to work. And I'd like to say just one word about my family who've been with me the whole time. This is my departure photo from last June. So my wife Samantha, we've been married for 18 years. My son Robert and my daughter Natalie, they're 11 and 9. A great opportunity to go in and spend a little time there, tiny bit of time in the Oval Office, but nice picture that we'll remember for a long time. Again, a great opportunity. All right, so let's move on to the Iraq portion of the talk. What I'm going to try to do is paint a picture of how important Iraq was in our national discourse back in 2006, 2007, and what was going on in Iraq and what was going on in Washington. And that'll frame how Joe Petraeus went into this testimony that he was required to give in September after he had taken command in February of 2007. So Iraq was we had done the invasion in 2003, as you recall, very successful. We went to Baghdad in a matter of weeks, knocked down the statue, Saddam fled, and we were essentially in control of the country. And then over time, the insurgency arose. We were not able to provide sufficient services or to have Iraqis provide sufficient services to the people. Low boiling insurgency becoming much stronger by the time 2005, 2006 rolled around. And it was pretty obvious that things were not going well in Iraq. You had different generals testifying, hey, we can't say that we're winning at this point, can't say that we're losing either, but we had plans initially. People were thinking about it really in terms of Desert Storm early on. Hey, we're going to do this and we're going to draw back down quickly. That was not the case. We ended up staying there for a long, long time, as you know. A lot of things going on. So these are all the problems Iraq was facing at that time. Foreign fighters. Al-Qaeda was not in Iraq when we invaded, but they took advantage of the opportunity once we were there. So they would infiltrate a lot of foreign fighters, many of them coming from Saudi Arabia to Damascus and then working their way in. Worked with the Saudis over time to help curb that flow a little bit, but it was still a continuous thing we had to work with. So again, that's the Sunni Arab side of the equation. If you look at Iraq's geography, Sunni Arabs, pretty much this part, Shia Arabs, down here, Kurds. So 3 distinct ethnicities or religions, ethno-sectarian identities there in Iraq, 3 separate ones. Again, Iraq, under Saddam was a Sunni Arab, again, a minority of the population, ruling a majority of Shia population. So it was a fundamental, deep political change once he was removed from power. Now, on the Shia side, you had Shia militias who were acting up, targeting U.S. forces, and targeting the government to some extent, not the government as much, more directed against the Americans. Whereas AQI was targeting everyone, and particularly Iraqi civilians and government, less so Americans. The Shia targeted almost specifically Americans. They're supported by these guys. Iran had a small cell, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Quds Force. Their whole purpose in life was to run these militias in Iraq and attack U.S. forces and U.S. facilities. again, situation there, extremists, and that's Zarqawi on the right, they were trying to ignite ethno-sectarian violence to really take advantage of the split between Sunni and Shia Arabs in particular. And they would randomly kill Shias, AQI side. The Shia began to defend themselves, worked through their militias, and fought back. So Baghdad and the rest of Iraq, a very bloody place in 2006. You have a government. If you form a new government, just because the people voted for it does not mean that that government has capabilities to provide services or to even function. I mean, you think how long it took us as a nation to really get our rules in place and our institutions that were enabled us to pass laws and provide services. It took a long time. So we had some pretty high expectations of a very nascent government. Maybe they weren't able to meet them. Now in late 2006, out in the West, in the Marine sector, and a fair number of Army troops out there with them, we started seeing some of the tribes very tired of Al-Qaeda. So Al-Qaeda in Iraq, they were perceived as an outside influence. And one of the anecdotes we used to use was the Al-Qaeda guys would come in, they would into a tribal area, they would marry one of the sheikh's daughters, and they'd tell everybody, you cannot smoke. That's simply not done with a Sunni Arab male. The guys wanted to smoke, and that's just a little thing, but it was something that they really didn't like the outside influence telling them what to do. They were not extremists. So they began to reject him. That Sheikh Sattar there, who was later killed, but he was one of the first to rise up and say, hey, I'm not going to work with or facilitate or turn a blind eye to Al-Qaeda and Iraq activities. And that's something we really exploited later during the surge. Now back in Washington, a lot of folks were having very deep doubts about Iraq, and it became politicized over time. But you had a distinguished group here, and I'll point out a few Stanford connections in my presentation. So at least one Stanford connection here, Dr. Perry, who's over in CSAC. Distinguished group, very known people, former secretaries, former very senior people in our government, came together, hey, what do we do about Iraq as the United States? And this was their recommendation. Their recommendation had several different flavors of it. The surge was not a principal recommendation that they had. The surge was something they said, well, that might help provide security in the short term. We're not sure it'll work in the long term. So the general concept was, hey, let's kind of begin to cut our losses, start drawing down, put more pressure on the Iraqis to act and to take an active role in their government. And to get your government to function. A very profound change in Washington, change in Secretary of Defense. And this happened after the November 2006 election. So we had Secretary Rumsfeld, who'd been the Secretary of Defense the entire time from the invasion forward. Very dominating individual, wedded essentially to the concept of transition. The faster we transition to Iraqi control, the sooner we can get U.S. forces out. And we're going to see here in a minute like a very different concept coming into play with the surge. He was replaced, as we know, by Secretary Bob Gates, who just left office and was replaced by Secretary Panetta. I believe it's a testament to Secretary Gates and his professionalism that he was kept on in the change from a Republican to a Democratic administration. So one of, I think, maybe the only person who has ever done that. We had a change in leadership in Iraq also. So General George Casey had been the commander of multinational force Iraq from 2004 until early 2007. So after the election, after the change in Secretary of Defense, General Petraeus was recommended for promotion. He had been a 3-star out at Leavenworth running our training and education establishment. He got his 4th star and he was sent back to Iraq, took over February 10th, 2007. In the background there you see General McChrystal. Now, General McChrystal, as you know, was in charge of Afghanistan and was relieved for that for some impertinent comments by his staff. And correct relief in my opinion. But during the time, he was a 3-star commander in charge of our Special Operations Forces in Iraq. So they worked very closely together throughout that entire time. And really, he's coming February 16th. General McChrystal will be speaking at the business school. So if you get a chance to go to that, I think that would be worth your time. He's a charismatic leader that has done a lot for this country in terms of fighting terrorism. So unfortunate that he had to be relieved. I think he, of most people, I mean, he's more embarrassed about it than anyone, but done a lot for our country, so be worth your time. Now the other prominent commander in Iraq, this is General Odierno. He was a 3-star commander, the corps commander, so he was in charge of the troops on the ground, the maneuver brigades. We went from 15 brigades in Iraq up to 20. A brigade's about 3,000 to 5,000 people. So he had the operational control of all of those and how we were going to employ them in Iraq and maneuver those forces. I like this shot of him because that's how I remember him during the surge. It's pretty intense, fairly worn out. He's a huge man. He should be in the NFL, but you'll see a picture of him later where gives some idea of his size. He's now the Chief of Staff in the Army. So he did very well in Iraq as a 3-star. He ended up going back and replacing General Petraeus. He got his 4th-star and became the next multinational force commander. So that's the team you had. General Odierno was a 3-star, maneuvering most of the conventional forces, working everything inside Iraq. General McChrystal was working all the special operations. And General Petraeus was working hand in hand with Ambassador Crocker with the Iraqi government and back to Washington. So, I mean, he was overall in charge of Iraq, but his focus really was up. He and General McChrystal, their focus was down in Iraq. All right, so we went back to Iraq in February, and it's a funny story that General Petraeus was back doing his testimony or his confirmation hearings in January. And he said, hey, are you on the team again? So it was January of 2007. So, yep, I said, okay, I have to do this. My wife, who never called me at work about an hour later. She had some kind of disturbance in the force. She knew this had happened, and she's like, hey, have you heard from Petraeus yet? I was like, yeah, I just did. So she cursed, hung up the phone, didn't talk to me for about a week, but then she was okay. Just a little personal snippet there. Funny how those things work. So we got back in Iraq in February 2007, and were struck immediately by how bad things looked compared to back in 04 and 05 when we'd been there the last time. This entire neighborhoods had been decimated in Baghdad. The sectarian conflict between Sunnis and Shia was still going on, but it just had horrific effects. And places where there had been vibrant markets before just bombed out. Car bombs that Al-Qaeda had been setting off, tremendous effects. Sectarian war between the neighborhoods, just really putting people into segregated spaces where before they'd lived a little bit together. Went back, we knew that there was this assessment due to Congress in September, and that was going to be a fairly significant event. And again, the expectations when we went back were not high. We did not expect the surge to work. I mean, the general approach was, we're going to give this one more shot, we're going to try really hard, and then we're going to call it and start drawing down, kind of in line with what the Baker-Hamilton report laid out at the time. And just to have more of a long-term, smaller presence, but draw down the bulk of our troops. But General Petraeus, I mean, he kind of had a good idea of how much pressure he was going to be under at the time. And he communicated to all of us, his personal staff, from day one, hey, I'm going to say what I think when I get up there. There's no pressure on me to say, hey, everything's working, it's going well, or to get out. And you had a very polarized political situation at the time. Republicans saying, we got to stay the course. Democrats saying, we got to start to draw down now. And again, I think one of the things he did to establish these parameters for us, he said, I have an open mind to this. We're going to look at the facts. We're going to figure out how we assess the facts. And that's what I'm going to report. He wasn't trying to cook the books one way or the other. Again, this was the general concept that we think we had in February, March that year. We're like, well, we're going to give it a try. Not sure it's going to work, and then we'll call it, start drawing it down. So we went on, and as he took over a multinational force, Iraq, it changed the mission. The general mission before had been, as I talked about, transition to Iraqi control. Iraqi forces had to take care of their country, provide security. As they stand up, we'll stand down. We went in with a very different approach, and the number one premise was we have to secure the population. The people have to feel safe where they live. And what that entailed was taking a different approach with the troops. troops had to move out into the neighborhoods in smaller and smaller units and be seen. U.S. troops and Iraqi troops. And the subsets of that fundamental change from transition to securing the population, we still wanted to create professional and good Iraqi security forces, but that was not the principal goal. The principal goal was to secure the population, to provide political space for Iraqi leaders to make the advances they needed to as a society. And we wanted to support their economic development, get their internal economy going, get their ability to produce oil and export oil back so they could have revenues to pour back into their infrastructure and into their people. And you had to have political progress. And it's such a fundamental change in Iraq that we really didn't understand before the invasion, that we were going to replace a Sunni leadership who had been in charge for a long time, ruling over a majority of people who were Shia, and then empower those Shia for the first time ever. They'd never run the government before, didn't have really technocrats, didn't have any government experience. It's a very fundamental political change in that system. All right, and we'll show you a really simple slide now. And this is just about Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And this is how we thought about dealing with Al-Qaeda in Iraq and how we were going to reduce their resources, their decision space, and their ability to wreak havoc in Iraq. Because they were a very well-led, organized, funded organization that they were setting off these car bombs every couple of days and just doing tremendous damage and killing hundreds and hundreds of people. So we had all of our interagency stuff. That's things Petraeus worked on, things you had to do with the populace, try to get people to reject Al-Qaeda. Detainee ops, we brought in new people in charge of that, and again, part of this was interrogations and getting enough information out of your detainee population to really understand what was going on. Your intelligence had to improve. You had to take advantage of the politics in Iraq. And again, the tribal awakenings were a huge thing that the Marines and the Army guys out in Anbar worked on, taking advantage of the Iraqis turning against Al-Qaeda. And then you always need kinetics. This is frankly just killing those bad guys. The concept was always to maximize the number of people you could reconcile with and bring into your polity, but at the end of the day, there were some who were irreconcilable, and those guys had to go away. So again, simple slide. You spent a lot of time on it. All right, so let's work our way towards the September assessment. We were not sure where it was going. The last surge troops got on the ground in June 2007. So they'd started in January. Basically a brigade a month came in, about 30,000 additional troops total. And June and July were the most violent months in Iraq. They've been the most US casualties, the highest levels of violence. So we're debating that as we're getting into August and going to this early September testimony. Like, well, is this really working? How are we going to know if it's working? And as we debated, we kind of came to the concept, well, if it's working, like we know there's going to be an uptick in violence originally as you put troops out there where they haven't been before. It'd be pushed back against that. But if it's working, over time your violence level should come down and your number of casualties should come down. So we were not sure at all that it was working at that point. Again, our casualties were going up, violence was going up. Late August, early September, we had a set of metrics that we used to measure overall violence in Iraq, and I'll show you in a minute. You started to see a little bit of a drop. Again, is that a temporary drop or is it going back up? We continued to debate that, and we weren't sure. All right, the Pentagon wasn't sure what they wanted to do, and this is inside the chain of command. You had different theories of the world there. There were still some folks that said, hey, we need to kind of end this surge and transition to Iraqis and walk our way back from it. There were still others who were fully supportive of the surge. All right, so we knew we had to testify in front of both the House and the Senate, 2 committees on each side. Fair amount of political theater in Washington. We were going into an election year, so you guys will get a little flavor of that the rest of this year. So you had, on the committees we were going to testify in front of, you had 3 of the presidential primary candidates at the time. Senator McCain, Senator Clinton, and Senator Obama. So again, they were using their positions on Iraq and this political theater beyond what we were worried about, but we were operating in that environment. All right, here's a picture of us. This is on July 4th, 2007, and I can tell that we're celebrating. We have a little bit of tinsel on our table, and we allowed ourselves a Diet Coke that day or something. This is on the back porch of General Petraeus' house out there. It was one of the Saddam vacation spots or something. Camp Victory in Al Palace. But another Stanford connection there. That was my boss at the time, Colonel Bill Rapp. He's now Major General Bill Rapp. He's a Stanford PhD. So he and me and these two captains and one other person, we were kind of the little internal think tank working for General Petraeus, doing a lot of work as we went forward for this testimony. You can kind of tell from the looks on our faces, we're not sure where it's going. Is it going to work? You can tell that we're tired, but we really were not very uncertain there. July 4th. All right, now to understand the environment General Petraeus was operating in, I have to show you this slide, which is the most pretentious slide in the inventory of the U.S. military. The world with commander's areas of responsibility. I learned the hard way never to show this to a non-U.S. person. It's presumptuous. Like, okay, I am the AFRICOM commander, so I am in charge of all of Africa. No, that's not what it's meant to be. It's meant that you're in charge of all U.S. military activity in that area. But it's, I mean, I wonder if the Romans had something like this. It's a pretty aggressive slide. So General Petraeus was here in Iraq, just one little subset of U.S. Central Command. Again, this is building into the chain of command and the environment he had to operate in to provide his assessment back to Congress. It's a good slide. It's unclassified. So the chain of command, this is the way it works in the military. General Petraeus was the commander of Iraq. Again, I talked to you earlier, I said hey, General Odierno and General McChrystal worked for him. And then there was another three-star running the training command, General Dubin. This is Admiral Fallon. He's in charge of Central Command, the little Middle East region there. So he's strictly in the chain of command. Secretary Gates to the President. So that is reporting chain. This person in the middle is General Peter Pace. He was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time. The chairman is not formally in the chain of command, but he might as well be, because the combatant commander and the theater commander, they coordinate very closely with the chairman. The chairman, by law, is an advisor to the Secretary of Defense and the President. So this is a reporting chain and how he's providing information. All right, this is a week before testimony in Iraq, Anbar Province. So you have the entire chain of command there. Here's General Odierno. Remember I told you he was big. General Petraeus, Admiral Fallon, General Pace behind the President, Secretary Gates, and another Stanford affiliate, Secretary Rice. So she's Secretary of State at that point. It's your third Stanford person in this presentation. So they came to Iraq.
Senator Day O'Connor was on that committee.
Okay, I missed that one. 4. Thank you. This was September 3rd, 2007. The President made a surprise trip. They landed at Al-Assad Air Base out in western Iraq in Anbar Province. Had a quick briefing. Really kind of a pep talk for General Petraeus, knowing the firestorm he was getting ready to go into back in Congress. All right, and here's the firestorm. These are not rock stars. This is a general and an ambassador. It's not Brad Pitt and Angelina going to the airport. So it was a complete zoo. There's as much press as they could jam in this room. It's a big hearing room in the Senate building. Just rushed them. It was amazing and very surreal in many respects. And it is a very different time. This is when Iraq was one of the very top issues in American politics and our political scene. All right, so going back to the chain of command, I want you to focus on the second paragraph. The standard practice when a commander testifies in front of Congress is to take your written testimony and like a week ahead of time, you submit it to the Pentagon. And then the chairman's office reviews it and checks off on it, and the Secretary of Defense. And even the Central Command would look at it as well. General Petraeus did not do that. He held his written testimony. It wasn't given to anyone until the morning of September 10th, his testimony. So he did not clear it formally. He briefed the chain of command, but he changed the rules for himself, knowing that was a way to protect his credibility. I'm not going to give this testimony out. I don't want to be attacked from the left. People saying, hey, he's just doing what the president told him to do. And he also didn't want to be perceived as, I don't know, he wanted to be perceived as an independent actor. And I think he was fairly successful in that. The next slide is very troubling to me. This appeared on September 10th in the New York Times, full-page ad, moveon.org. So, not really supportive of our commander in Iraq during wartime. I can't imagine running something like this against Eisenhower during World War II, but I guess we were winning most of the time. But it's a very hurtful ad. I mean, most of my colleagues found it very troubling that you would attack your commander who's been there working as hard as he could possibly work and was just expected to give his testimony he's ordered to in front of Congress. So I'm not sure what they were trying to accomplish with this. Joe Petraeus was personally wounded by the New York Times decision to give them a cut rate to run this full-page ad because he grew up in Cornwall, New York, and had read the New York Times his entire life. All right, one of the charts we used in testimony. Again, this was our overall way of measuring violence in Iraq, and you can see it getting worse and worse and worse over time. Again, this is when we got there, kept getting worse, started improving. Again, as we're putting everything we're going to use for testimony together, still not certain if this is going to go back up or continue down. But it did continue down. Again, this is one of the slides that we used. I'll give you one for a few months later to show that it did continue down. And at a certain point, this became known as the Virginia chart because it kind of looked like the state of Virginia. But over time, it continued to go down and down and down. It stayed at this level for up until December. Not sure what it is now because we're not measuring it.
What are the different colors?
The different colors are types of attack. So there's the green ones are against the Iraqi government, the blue ones are bombs, sniper attacks, mortars and rockets. And I mean, we're always worried about, are we counting all of these, are we getting them all? But the way we counted them was consistent over time, so we were at least confident in the trends. All right, we'll wrap up here. The surge. We can debate whether the surge was successful or not. I don't think that's going to be settled for a long time, because at this point it's up to the Iraqis. There was an unmistakable drop in violence. So many factors involved that we really didn't understand as we went into the surge. We knew we were going to try it. A lot of things worked together to help make the surge successful. Again, we did reduce violence. The Iraqis were able to hold more elections. Not sure they made a ton of political progress, but we did get it to the political space that they needed to operate in. Now, we've ended combat operations in 2009, and the drawdown's complete. We're down to 150 troops in Iraq, and they're working for the ambassador. They're not there in any kind of formal capacity. It's pretty amazing if you look at it. November 2007, we were at 170,000 troops. We're down to 0 now, except for those working for the ambassador. So again, it's going to take a long time to tell what Iraq's role is going to be in the Middle East, how it's going to develop as a society, how it's going to develop its politics. I mean, if you can have a representative, co-religionist, prosperous country there in the Middle East, I think that's a positive thing. Are we going to get there anytime soon? It's not obvious. All right, so we wrap up with some of the ethical implications that I took away from this experience. Again, a lot of it was just the tone that General Petraeus set for all of us. I mean, he's a very optimistic, can-do, positive guy, but he curtailed that just a little bit during this time because he understood the pressure he was going to be under. So instead of he didn't want to be portrayed as Pollyannish or just everything's going great, we're going to make it. He took a much more, not serious, but just a very sober persona more in public. Just the facts, a Joe Friday type approach. He communicated with everyone, so down to the troops, through these letters to the field, up to Washington. We had a secure video teleconference every Monday with the president and the full NSC. So he's communicating constantly up and down. He brought over people with different opinions. People from the think tanks. He brought in people from think tanks to the left, right, and center. And engaged those who didn't believe what we were doing or had a very different opinion. And those who were on the side, he engaged them, but did not give them any additional access or anything. Managing expectations. Again, he held everything very tightly going into that testimony. Said, hey, and he let them know that's what he was going to do. So we're not going to go out there publicly and say anything until I'm in front of Congress. This is the way I think it's going in general, but my specific testimony is mine. I think he did a pretty good job of avoiding getting pulled into partisan politics. Again, when he testified, Senator Clinton made some pretty nasty comments, said, hey, you have to have a willing suspension of disbelief to think that the surge in Iraq is working. Didn't take debate. You had Senator Obama at the time saying, hey, we need to end the surge now and start the drawdown. So it's a very heated environment. And again, it's part of that presidential election cycle. So I think he did a pretty good job preserving his decision space. All right, if you want to know more, there's a lot of books out there. These are just a couple. Truth in Advertising. I'm a minor character in the gamble because I made a couple of flamboyant quotes. These are pretty good. This one is Greg Jaffe and David Cloud. They looked at 4 Army generals and really the effect the Iraq War had on them. It's General Abizaid, General Casey, General Corelli, General Petraeus. And this book is just coming out, Paula Broadwell. All right, so this is us, November 2007. It's General Petraeus doing what he does, communicating. He's writing 100 emails back to people. As soon as we land, they'll plug his computer in somewhere and they'll all shoot out. And they're amazed at how he wrote it back to them. I'm mystified here. We had to stop in Turkey on the way back to do some kind of ministerial meetings. We had to wear our dress uniforms, so I'm really not happy about wearing my dress uniform back into Iraq. All right, Christmas. I showed you the July 4th. We're a little happier at Christmas. If you look closely, you can see the 4 stars on his Santa hat. And then finally, this is just a picture I liked of him. Just kind of captures the weight of the world that was on his shoulders at the time, how much pressure he was under. All right, that's all I got. It took a little more time than I wanted, but I'd be glad to entertain your questions.